I'm so happy to see you all here at the Lynbrook Public Library. My name is Kathy Buxbaum. I'm the Assistant Director, and I'm so excited to see so many wonderful faces here tonight. So before we get to our wonderful program, America 250, what happened right here in Lynbrook and East Rockaway, I just want to give you a few housekeeping items. If there is an emergency, you can go out the doors that you came in, or you can go out our beautiful double doors that are part of our landmark status that Lynbrook Public Library just received for this beautiful building. If you need to use the restroom, there are keys right outside the doors that you can use to open. Use the restroom and hang it right back up. Please remember to silence your cell phones for our performance. And tonight's experience is America 250. So we're going to start off with our West End patriotic singers led by Jody Beaver. Then we are going to have 3 intermissions where we'll be able to taste some Martha's Punch and meet George and Martha Washington. And then we will be invited to stay for some lectures about the Revolutionary War and what happened here in Lynbrook and East Rockaway, finishing with a group sing-along. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My name is Jody Abrams. I'm a very proud music and chorus teacher at West End Elementary School here in Lynbrook. It is an honor to participate in tonight's performance, so I'd like to thank the Lynbrook Public Library and Historical Society of Lynbrook for inviting us to be part of this. So these are our second grade singers, and back in March, every year at West End, we put on a play, a performance where students sing patriotic songs and have speaking parts. They did, I think, over 11 songs. Tonight you're going to hear 5 of those songs. So I'm really proud and especially excited for this particular group of students that it just so happens to land the 250th anniversary is this particular group. They are an absolute pleasure to work with, and they are, I always call them superstars, and you'll see why in a few moments. So as we sing each song, I'm just going to call up a student to introduce it for us, and that being said, I would like to call up our first speakers, Valerie and Haysha. Will you please come up to this microphone? Okay, and big voice.
Good evening. We are the second grade singers from West End School. Our first song will be the Star Spangled Banner. Please sing.
Please stand again. Feel free to sing along with us.
At the twilight's
I would like to call up our next speaker, Rodrigo.
Our next song is called I Love America.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to call up Jack Mason to introduce our next song.
Our next song is called Home on the Range.
At this time, I'd like to call up Anastasia to introduce our next song. God bless America. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to call up our final speaker. Ella, please come up.
We enjoyed singing for you tonight. Our final song is called You're a Grand Old Flag.
of West End, directed by Jody Abrams. This is your time. I'll give you 10 seconds to do that.
Big smiles.
Big smiles. You did a wonderful, fabulous job. We all feel very patriotic.
So, welcome to America 250. What happened right here. This evening I want to tell you not only what happened across the 13 colonies 250 years ago, what happened on the very ground that we walked on today. As the historian of the village of Lynbrook and the author of 2 books on local history, the history of Lynbrook and Water and Ice, the tragic wrecks of Bristol and Mexico, I deal in facts, not make-believe. But for the next 2 minutes, I'm going to pretend that I am George Washington himself. Good evening. Yes, I am George Washington, and I have to tell you why I have this gentleman next to me. Happens to be Patrick Mantle of the Huntington Militia. He does reenactments all across Long Island, but I brought him along for my personal safety. And I'm going to explain why. The last time I was here was 1790, okay? The war had ended. And I came out to Long Island to celebrate this great country and the support that I got on Long Island for the great cause of the American Revolution. But that does not include most of the people who lived in the town of Hempstead. And it certainly didn't include the people who lived right here in near Rockaway. Yes, I call this place near Rockaway. Who's heard that name before? But very few have. Because that was the name in 1790 for Lynbrook, East Rockaway, Rockville Center, Valley Stream, Hewlett, Malvern, all called near Rockaway. Not what you call them today. In 1776, the Tories from near Rockaway, the Loyalists, the supporters of the king, that's they formed an armed militia. They attempted to kidnap me if I ever come out this way. Can you imagine if that had succeeded? This was the time between Lexington and Concord and the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That early. Had they kidnapped me right then, who knows whether the war had even gone on. It may have ended right there. It makes me so angry to think about it that I'm afraid I may violate my sworn oath not to swear, and I always tell the truth. And so I'm going to let Mr. Mattson come back, and I can let my bodyguard go. Thank you, Patrick Mantle of the Hunting Militia, for coming down. Thank you so much. Okay, the village historian is back. And as you'll learn this evening, George Washington had every right to be angry. He had the monumental task, and I think I've got to find my, the slideshow. I just took on the role. And that was the grand tour that he did of Long Island, all the way out to Setauket and also the Floyd Manor. He stopped in Hempstead for a few minutes and slept there and got out fast. Now, he had a monumental task in 1776, 250 years ago. He had to organize an army. There was no army in America. Woodsmen, farmers, tradesmen, and get them into a fighting force, and the most he could ever get was 20,000 people. And he was up against this group, British troops. 131,000 of them against his 20,000, well-trained. Making matters worse, 25,000 Americans fought with the British, fought alongside them. Some of them dressed in green outfits like that and were called greencoats. Others wore green sprigs in their hair, and I guess this little pointer can show you that. Long Island added 1,800 men to the British side. and many of them were from near here. Now, the Revolutionary War began in April 1775. That was when the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord in Massachusetts. And then over a year later, the Continental Congress met in Philadelphia. Broiling temperatures of July 250 years ago, and they created and they signed the Declaration of Independence. But just days before that signing, word arrived that 45 British warships had dropped anchor off Staten Island in the lower bay of New York, and more were on the way. They had 32,000 troops. And despite that, very grim news arrived in Philadelphia about that. The 56 signers, they published the Declaration of Independence, knowing what was about to happen, for all the world to see, printed it up and passed it around. And that document demonstrated their commitment, uncompromising dedication to a new and independent American republic. And the final sentence of that declaration: we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Each signer knew that he faced certain death, probably by hanging, if they lost the fight for independence. Just as a kind of an aside, it's not only I'll be talking most about men who were fighting in the Revolutionary War, the women got involved too. One of the signers, you know the name, Francis Lewis. He has Francis Lewis Boulevard in Queens. He lived in Queens. And he was down in Philadelphia signing the document. His wife was up in Whitestone, Queens. When the British invaded Long Island, they threw her in prison because she refused to sign a certification that she supported the king. She was treated so badly that they let her out of prison and she died. So the women were there too, suffering in many hard ways during the entire revolution. The struggle would last until 1783, when the Treaty of Paris was signed, ending the war. So it's only right that now, 250 years later, the patriotic songs would be sung as we heard today so beautifully, and that the names and the places that ring out in our memory should echo throughout the country. Places like these: the Battle of Lexington and Concord, April 1775, which is when the war kind of officially started, the fight began. The Battle of Bunker Hill, right after that. The Battle of Long Island took place. I'll be talking about that in just a moment. Then we had Washington crossing the Delaware, Christmas night, 1776. The next day, the Battle of Trenton, the first real victory of the Americans. And the Battle of Saratoga, which was the turning point of the war, won by the U.S. The winter that followed was horrible at Valley Forge. You've all heard of that. And then the final victory at Yorktown, helped by the French. The battle closer to home was the Battle of Long Island. This was the biggest battle of the war. It's not the 2,000 American casualties that are remembered compared to the 400 British casualties, but instead it is George Washington's brilliant nighttime retreat across the East River. He saved his army, what was left of it. But out on Long Island, we had the Culper Spy Ring. They get all the attention. The names of its members, Talmadge, Anna Strong, Abraham Woodhull, they're celebrated. They have books and pamphlets and TV series and movies. There was, of course, Anna's petticoat waved as a signal. There's the writing in invisible ink. But today I'm not going to tell you about what happened in the rest of Long Island, what happened right here in what we call East Rockaway, Lynbrook, Hewlett, Rockwell Center. they called near Rockaway. And as you can see in this old map, here's Hempstead, here's Rockaway, far Rockaway, and there's us, near Rockaway. Because the town center, wherever all the government was, saw this as nearer to them than far Rockaway. And then the peninsula is the Rockaway Peninsula. That would be great if I could tell you on this 250th anniversary of our great country how the colonists of near Rockaway died and fought for the ideals of our country. But like George Washington, I can't tell a lie. It was not like that. As much as a fifth of Americans of the population remained loyal to the king. They felt they were British. Near Rockaway, closer to half, if not more, were loyal to the king. So completely were they against the independence that they supported the British for all 8 years of the war. Things were different just 15 miles away. There, the Patriots outnumbered the Tories. So why the difference? The early history of Long Island may present some clues. So bear with me for a moment while I depart from the Revolutionary War for a moment to discuss who was here before us. For thousands of years, the Lenape Indians were in this entire mid-Atlantic area. And specifically, there were the Canarsie and the Rockaway, right where we are. Over many generations, they had a system of farming and agriculture, fishing, hunting. Their lives were healthier by far than in England, say, squalid, overcrowded cities, communicable diseases, smallpox, the plague. In 1643, strange new people arrived in the land of the Rockaway. They spoke a weird language, English. They were Robert Fordham and John Carman. They had sailed across the Sound from Connecticut. And then they had walked across the island, crossing across these vast plains, the Long Island Plains, the Hempstead Plains, 62 square miles. Those plains look like this. This is the last bit of plains left. It's over by Nassau Community College, just about 1/10 of an acre is all that's left. Of course, we know those plains today, they look like that, pure suburbia. But when Fordham and Carman saw that, they saw perfect grazing lands for their animals. Now, south of the plains, they found lush woodlands, clear freshwater streams flowing down to the bay. And they found hundreds of people there, the Rachquaaki, who the English mispronounced as Rockaway. Fordham and Carman offered the Rockaways some knives, axes, beads, blankets, if they would simply put their X on a piece of paper. Well, the Dutch had been there, and the Dutch wanted to get furs to get those, be given the axes and such. And here these Englishmen, all you had to do was put your X on the piece of paper. They had no idea what a deed was. With it, they signed away what is today the entire town of Hempstead, from the plains all the way to Long Beach. And the Rockaways soon found out what a deed of land was. English farmers began fencing in their land and chasing away the Rockaway trespassers. And by the time of the Revolutionary War, the Rockaway natives were almost gone, many of them having died from the diseases that the English brought, the smallpox and so on. Near Rockaway, on the other hand, had grown slowly, a sleepy collection of family farms, and some had slaves. There were 2 grist mills in this area along the Mill River. This is one. It's still here today in East Rockaway, East Rockaway Grist Mill. I just want you to note the 3rd-story window on that mill. There are also windows on the DeMott's Mill on the Mill River. that upper mill window will soon play a part in my story about what happened here. Now, I mentioned before Lexington and Concord, that had taken place in 1775. When that happened, patriotic fervor spread throughout the 13 colonies, but not in near Rockaway. The Long Island Plains that I showed you before, they had become a great separator between the north side and the south of Long Island. It is not just an impressive geographical feature. The people living on the necks, they would have all of their communication, their economic, trading, family ties were across to Connecticut. That's where all the patriot fervor was in New England. But here, in near Rockaway, do I have it right? Yeah, about there. Their trading was with New York, Brooklyn. Family ties were all there. And here's an example of the kind of trading that was done. Fresh vegetables, flour, seafood, hay, cordwood, lumber, all brought into the city or taken in by boat. And New York City residents were not at all like the New Englanders, the patriotic New Englanders. They saw no reason to revolt against the king. In 1776, hundreds of Tories gathered at Francis's Tavern in New York City to celebrate signing their declaration, not their declaration of independence. They had a declaration they entitled Declaration of Dependence, dependence on Britain. And it was the same here in near Rockaway and in the entire town of Hempstead. I want you to see an amazing formal resolution signed by the town of Hempstead on April 4th, 1775. When I told a member of the board of the town of Hempstead about this, he said, "This is impossible. How could this be?" But it has been documented. April 4th, 1775, the Hempstead Town Board resolved, "True and faithful allegiance to His Majesty King George III, our gracious and lawful sovereign." Can you imagine? So upset were the patriots in the North Shore of Long Island, north of the Hempstead Plains, that they voted to secede from the town of Hempstead. The town of Hempstead had included all of them. They seceded from the town of Hempstead, and that remains today, North Hempstead and Hempstead. That was where it was created. Things soon went from words of anger to gunshots when Tory blood was spilled right here in near Rockaway. The next several slides are based on sworn contemporaneous testimony, but there were no illustrations or certainly no photography in the day. So the only way I could illustrate this was to create images using ChatGPT, etc., AI software. So that's the only way to do it. So here we have George Washington. So April 1776 was Lexington and Concord, and we have July 4th as the Declaration of Independence, but we don't yet have the Battle of Long Island. And so the British are just off the shore, and he's got to plan defense for the attack. And so he's in New York City preparing his defense plan. The loyal Tories, they're forming a secret militia, as I mentioned, with guns to capture him if he should come out to Long Island. It was led by Richard Hewlett, of an area who's lived in what is today East Rockaway, and he would later serve the British as lieutenant colonel for the rest of the war. Washington had reason to be suspicious of the Tories because New York Tories had tried to poison his food. And so, when informants told him Tories were plotting to kidnap him if he should ever come out to near Rockaway, he was outraged. He sent orders to the Minutemen to disarm those people and throw them in jail. June 22nd. That date sound familiar? That's today. June 22nd, 250 years ago, today, Washington's Minutemen marched out from Jamaica to arrest the near Rockaway Tories. Guys like Patrick, who came out and stood beside me, to arrest them and seize their guns. So word got out, somehow the word got ahead of them that they were coming. Kind of like the opposite of the British are coming. No, this is the Minutemen are coming, right? Word arrived that they were coming, and the Tories employed their early warning system. You probably have heard of Anna Strong with the culpa spy ring with her petticoat hanging. Well, we had our own thing here and working the opposite way. There it is, hanging a large white sheet from the upper story window of Anthony DeMott's mill in Rockville Center on the border of Lynbrook. On seeing the white sheet, 9 of the Tories grabbed their guns and ran up the Ocean Road, Ocean Avenue, past the mill pond into Tanglewood Swamp. The 9 Tories were, and I have their names, there was sworn testimony about this, George, Daniel, Joseph, and Richard Smith, not all brothers, common name. Anthony, Michael, David DeMott, Benjamin Pettit, and one other man, and his name was not recorded. He may have been a stranger. So now with the Washington Minutemen closing in on them, the Tories realized that they were outnumbered and outgunned. They were desperate. So they piled into flat-bottom sedge boats and paddled out into the middle of the swamp. The swamp was greater than you see today. They thought they were safe out there. The leader of the Minutemen, Stephen Ryder, he was lived in Jamaica. He climbed into a tree to see where the Tories had disappeared to. One of the Tories in the sedge boat, it's thought to believe it was the stranger, whose name we don't know, then made a terrible mistake. He fired his musket, a warning shot. Ryder saw the flash and he was just where they were now. He was a skilled marksman, and so he fired his musket and put a bullet through the shoulder of a different man than the one who fired the shot. His name was George Smith. Now they realized that it dead ducks, you'd say, out there in the sedge boats. The 9 plotters rowed to shore and surrendered. This ended the Battle of the Swamp almost before it began. Now, Ryder's men hauled them to Jamaica and threw them into jail. But as the jail door closed, one of the men turned around and said, "We would sooner fight for the king than Congress, and we totally deny the authority of that body." This was not an idle claim. These Tories had already been supporting the king, helping the British, because they were, as I told you before, were out off Staten Island and also elsewhere off Long Island, anchored, waiting for an amphibious invasion of New York. And the Tories had been sailing out there with fresh food and exchanging it for gunpowder. So when the British troops landed and the Battle of Long Island was fought, which the British won decisively, the British released these guys from jail, the Tories from jail. And what do you think they did with Stephen Ryder? Locked him up in the same jail that they took the 9 guys out of. The 9 newly released Tories, they enlisted in the British Army or spent the next several years of the war in near Rockaway, collaborating with the British. They abused the increasingly angry and patriot neighbors that they had, confiscated their food, took their animals, even their firewood. And they also forced patriots to quarter British troops in their barns and in their houses. The last straw was when the patriots were forced to sign an oath of loyalty to the king. And when they refused that, it was time to leave. Many of those patriots that lived here in Near Rockaway fled across the Sound to Connecticut. They could take it no more. At the Revolutionary War's end, the patriots returned to Near Rockaway, and they took revenge against those Tories, as you might expect they would, the people who had abused them for 7 long years. At first, it was just tricks and jokes and name-calling and sticking a label Torre on the back of his shirt. But things began to threaten to get violent. At that point, some of the Near Rockaway Tories now had to do what had happened to the Patriots. They had to leave town. They boarded ships to British-controlled New Brunswick, Canada. Some of them never returned, including the notorious Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hewlett, who stayed in Canada for the rest of his life. Another Near Rockaway Tory was Uriah Pearsall. He fled to New Brunswick with his 5 sons to escape persecution. Only one of his sons stayed, Samuel. He decided to tough it out and remain here in Near Rockaway, and his newborn son was named Wright Pearsall, a name you'll hear again in just a moment. It took a decade or two for the tensions between the Tories and the Patriots to fully settle down in Near Rockaway. It had been a civil war, literally a civil war. And some members of the Pearsall and Hewlett families, other exiled Tories, they did come back when they realized that they had chosen the wrong side in the Revolutionary War. So they returned from Canada, reclaimed their homes, and they became leading citizens of Near Rockaway. Uriah Pearsall's son, Wright, I mentioned him before, he would become the founder of the village of Lynbrook. His name would be placed on the village itself, the village of Pearsall's Corners. We now have a Pearsall Cafe, whatever it is, restaurant, later known Lynbrook. So the takeaway from this story that I've told you tonight is that 250 years ago, there were brave, inspired Americans. They risked their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for a new country against overwhelming odds. The overwhelming forces of the British Empire, aided and abetted by other Englishmen who lived in America, decided they were English rather than Americans, and even against opposition at home, at their own homes. Despite the differences, despite our differences today, Americans have a knack to come together again, don't we? And that way we make and we keep what is now the greatest country on earth. Thank you for coming.
Hello, my name is Ben. I'm a lifelong Lynbrook resident. And tonight was a great night at the Lynbrook Public Library. It was bookended by some great sing-alongs, some patriotic sing-alongs. We had 2 fantastic historians speak and share their knowledge about the town's history, about Lynbrook during the Revolutionary War. I definitely learned a lot. The community really came together, and we had a great night. Events like these at the Lynbrook Public Library are really what Lynbrook is all about. Something that surprised me about Lynbrook was learning that the street names that are so commonplace are named after people who played a significant role in the birth of this nation.
Well, thank you guys for joining us tonight. My presentation won't be as in-depth about the Revolution. I'm going to be concentrating more on East Rockaway's local patriot, a gentleman by the name of Robert Davison, who served in the Connecticut State Navy during the Revolutionary War. Robert Davison, some of you guys might recognize that name, Davison. A lot of the streets around East Rockaway, some streets in Lynbrook. Davison Plaza, Davison Avenue. There's a Davison Avenue in Oceanside. All of these places, these names come from this one gentleman, Robert Davison, who was the first member of the Davison family. Well, not technically the first member, but the first member of the Davison family to settle in the New Rockaway area. His father had actually settled here before. Again, my name is Frank Torre. I'm the village historian of East Rockaway. Torre, T-O-R-R-E, not T-O-R-Y, so you guys are okay. I have some patriots in the back with some heavy firearms back there. I don't want to upset anybody. All right, so I'm going to jump right into it. It's a short presentation, so don't worry, you'll be out of here by sometime tomorrow morning early, okay? So make sure you're comfortable. All right, Robert Davison, sailor, patriot, and miller. So Robert Davison was born in Kent, England on September 4th, 1756. And you might be wondering to yourself, why would a gentleman who was born in Kent, England be such a big part of the American Revolution? Robert Davison's father, the Reverend Robert Davison, had purchased some land in Hempstead sometime in the 1750s. He owned a relatively large farm out there and was pretty successful. But eventually he wanted to move back to England, and that's something that he did. He passed his land over to his brother, Alexander, and he moved back to England, where on September 4th, 1756, his son, Robert, was born. Now, Robert grew up in England as a British subject and, would be subject to the thoughts and the ideas and the ideals of a British subject. But he grew up listening to his father's stories of his home in Hempstead, his farm. And not only just the stories of the farm, but the stories of the people who lived in Hempstead and the people who lived in the area. And he was sympathetic. So though he grew up as a British subject, a family tradition proudly recalls that as a young man, he felt deep burning sympathy for the plight of the American colonies, how they were being treated and how they had a lack of representation in local government. He acted on that sympathy at the most volatile moment in the history of our revolution, on the eve of our revolution. Right as the colonies were preparing to declare their independence in the spring of 1776, Robert left England. He's 19 years old. He leaves his home, comes to a place that he's never been before. Okay, he comes to Connecticut. He settles in the community of New London, Connecticut. And at that time, New London, Connecticut, and especially the state of Connecticut, had been heavily patriot. They were sick of the way they were being treated by the British government, but they were sick of the way they were treated by local powers that be. And they formed the Connecticut State Navy, which was at that time, for all intents and purposes, the official navy of the Continental Congress. Robert's service to the American Revolution begins on June 5th, 1776, just weeks before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, when he enlists in this Connecticut State Navy. And now he comes to the United States. Other than his uncle Alexander, who is still residing in the area, our area, he had another uncle, a gentleman by the name of Captain Thomas Davison. And Captain Thomas Davison was a well-known, respected, local shipping captain out of Norwich and the southern Connecticut area. And he joined up with his uncle to serve in the Connecticut State Navy. Instead of entering the Continental Navy, Robert served the Connecticut Specialized Navy under the command of a gentleman by the name of Captain Theophilus Stanton. Theo Stanton was also a highly respected shipping captain in that area. And when the General Assembly of the state of Connecticut, or before the state of Connecticut, but of Connecticut, ordered 4 row galleys. Now this here is a model. This is a model of a row galley. All right. The one that they served on was called the Shark, which had one mast. I couldn't find a model of the one with the one mast, but this particular row galley is set up as a sloop, and the Shark was a single mast, 60 foot. It was 60 feet long, had a beam of draft of 18 feet, a depth and hold of 5 inches. So it was actually a relatively shallow bottom boat. This made it fast. This made it was a deadly weapon of war. It could maneuver around larger boats, and it was fitted at its height with 5 cannons, 3 9-pounders and 2 3-pounder cannons. Now those aren't, the cannon isn't 9 pounds. It was the ordnance that was 9 pounds. So these are actually a relatively large cannon. The 3-pound the guns were a little smaller and would have been mounted on swivels. So these boats were very fast. They were very agile. They were ideal for patrolling up and down the shores. Now, at this time, prior to the war and during the war, there were many raids. And I'm not sure if any of you folks have heard about some of the raids that took place here in East Rockaway, but there were a number of British raids that took place in the South Shore, especially in our neighborhood. Back in the day, the farmers would graze their cattle out on the salt marsh instead of bringing the salt marsh to the cows. And the British would come around and pick off a cow. They would come in and they would steal and disrupt the economy as best they could at the time. The Patriots did the same thing. They would come in, they would go up through the marshes, and they would raid British holdings and disrupt their economy and their farm operations as best they could as well. So these boats, these galley boats, were fast. They could patrol the waters and protect the American holdings as best they could, mostly along the North Shore and the South Shore of Connecticut. But they also saw some engagements up through the East River and along through Manhattan as well. That's the specialized purpose of these galley boats. So this was a row galley. In addition to the sails that they would be propelled by, they were also oars that would come out, making them very fast and effective weapons. The Shark, authorized by the Connecticut State General Assembly for coastal defense, the Shark was purpose-built in Norwich, Connecticut, and fully outfitted by July 1776. These vessels were rigged as sloops, again, like I explained. Robert and his crew, it was a crew of 50, so there would be 50 men on board these ships, that includes officers, would patrol the Sound and the river, acting as a defensive, crucial defensive barrier against British naval movements. Originally, the Shark was intended to just patrol Connecticut and the North Shore of Long Island, but sooner rather than later, the British, after the Battle of Long Island, decided that they were going to come in with some force, and they strategically had to take control of the Hudson River. So Washington ordered the Connecticut State Navy, a number of larger ships, a number of some sloops, some bigger vessels, and including the 3 row galleys that the Connecticut State Navy had in their flotilla to the Hudson River. And Robert Davison would have been a crew member on board one of these ships during this time. The Hudson River battles. So they saw a fair amount of action, not only just protecting the coastline from raiders, from privateers and pirates, for lack of better terms, but they actually had some official engagements. For example, August 1776, we see the Battle of Tappan Zee. If you've ever been over the Tappan Zee Bridge, you're familiar with the Tappan Zee section of the Hudson River, where it really widens out to lead the Dutch to call it the sea, the Tappan Zee. It's a large area, and you would imagine how navigation and the ability of these row galleys to circle around the targets and how effective they might have been. So Washington wanted these row galleys up in the Hudson River in August and October, especially in October, when the British pushed through the forcing of the Hudson. Prior to the British forcing their way up into the northern Hudson region, we had a fair amount of forts and a chain. There was a large chain that was hung across the river to attempt the larger boats with a deeper draft from coming up into the Hudson River. And the British forced their way right through the chains, the different fortifications there, which was called the Forcing of the Hudson, on October 9th, 1776, and outgunned the highly maneuverable ships, unfortunately. They were able to escape further up into the Hudson River, where they were able to regroup and kind of continue their patrolling and continue their duties, their patrolling and protecting the local fortifications. Unfortunately, in the fall of 1777, while stationed up in the northern Hudson region, they were forced to scuttle and set fire to their ship. Now, they didn't want these deadly, like I said, these were very maneuverable, very fast, effective weapons of war that they used, and they didn't want them falling into the wrong hands. So on October 10th, cornered and facing total capture by an overwhelming British fleet, Robert Davison, under the command of Captain Theo Stanton, scuttled their ship and set it ablaze near Constitution Island, which was just opposite of West Point. Evacuated the crew safely and dispersed. Now, at this time, the British had taken the area over, and they weren't in friendly territory. So they had to disperse themselves, out into the countryside, sort of disappear. And while other crewmates might have went towards Connecticut or upstate New York to avoid British capture, you see Robert Davison came here to Long Island, very likely because of his stories that his father had told him about Hempstead and about the area. So 1777 is obviously, we still have a couple of years left of this war, and they did their duty, they served their country, and now it was time to slip back into regular society. So the Davisons of Long Island, as I explained earlier, the Reverend Robert Davison had settled in Hempstead in the 1750s. 1751, he arrives in the South Shore. Recording of his official cattle earmarks in Hempstead. Weeks later, in August 7th, 1751, he planted deep roots by buying this massive farm, $3,000, which was a lot of money back then. When you account for inflation. The Reverend, he farmed his land for a number of years and then decided to go back to England in 1759, sold his land to his brother. His brother sold the land eventually, and that was it for Robert Davison. He never returned to America. He stayed in England, but his son did. He finds himself back in Hempstead and finds love right away, which is an interesting story in my opinion, because you'll see this name, Nancy Ann DeMott, if you remember in Art's story. Anthony DeMott, who owned the mill, signaled to the Patriots with the sheet on the second floor of the window. So Anthony DeMott was a Tory. He was a loyalist, as most wealthy men in Hempstead were at that time. And now this is 1779 when Davison asks for his daughter's hand in marriage. He comes to the mill. He works for a couple of years, and by all accounts is relatively friendly with the loyalist. I wonder how Thanksgiving dinner must have gone, To be a fly on the wall for that interaction would have been interesting. In 1779, there was no records of where they were married, but it was either at the old Sandhole Church or most likely St. George's in Hempstead. But in 1779, they're married, and they have 7 children together. The 7 children, Anne, David, Thomas, Robert, Anthony, Alexander, and Phoebe. So if you're familiar with a little bit of East Rockaway history, and if you've been down to the Gristmill Museum, our beautiful Haviland Davison Gristmill Museum down in Memorial Park, right behind the Village Hall there, you'll know a little bit about Alexander Davison, who was one of the early proprietors of the mill. Now, Robert ran the mill for a number of years. Based on his experience at the DeMott Mill, he eventually purchases this mill that had been built in 1689 by Joseph Haviland in either 1818, which the official record is, but I have some documents that might say a little earlier in 1816. But he purchases the mill. And a couple of years, he only runs it for a number of years before he passes away, leaving it to his son, Alexander. Now, he was a very shrewd businessman, and he was able to kind of circumnavigate local laws, just the way things were. And he wanted his son, Alexander, who is the youngest of his sons, to take over the mill. His other sons were already established in the area, had their own businesses, their own families. But as Robert grew older, his sharp mind turned to protecting the empire he had built. On March 15th, 1819, he drafted a legally savvy will, knowing that the executor could not legally sell the estate to themselves, because at that time Alexander was not of age yet. He was able to leave it to a gentleman by the name of Oliver Denton, and who was a good friend of his, and his 2 older sons who held it in trust for Alexander. And it was Alexander's family that had operated that mill from that time in 1825 when Robert passed away until 1920 when the mill was moved up Ocean Avenue. For well over 100 years, the the Davison family operated this mill. Wasn't just completely destroyed in 1920 when they moved it. They used it for many years until 1963. And in 1963, it was sold to the Village of East Rockaway for $1. And thankfully, the Village of East Rockaway preserved that history for all of us to enjoy today. Although we do have a number of Torre or Loyalist sympathizers in the area, we can say that we are proud of Robert Davison, the patriot who served in the Connecticut State Navy and moved here and settled and grew his beautiful family in East Rockaway. And that's it. If anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free. We'll be floating around. And thank you for listening to me drone on. My name is Frank Torre. I'm the president of the Historical Society of East Rockaway and Lynbrook. In addition to that, I'm the public historian for the Village of East Rockaway. I think local history is a great cross-section of the people who came before us. You can't tell the story of America without telling the story of the people who, right here in our very own backyard. I think it's important to learn from their mistakes, learn from their trials and tribulations so we can go forward as a community. Not too many people get out there and really read about their local history. Most people concentrate on the broader history of America, the broader history of New York, even Long Island with the Culver Spiring and all that stuff. I think people are interested to find out that a lot of this stuff took place right here in Lynbrook, right here in East Rockaway. I think it's important for the members of the community to get out there and learn about the people who came before them. They learn about the people who, the street they live on, who the streets are named after. The parks, the local establishments, some of the bars have these names, Pearsall's for example, of the people who lived here. And I think people identify with that local history. They identify with the history that takes place in their own backyard.
Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step and with the girls behind.